Odysseus stands upon the stone threshold, the rags of a beggar falling from his shoulders like the skin of a dead snake. In his grip, the massive bow of Eurytus hums with a lethal, dormant energy. Before him, the Great Hall of Ithaca is a sea of silk and arrogance, filled with 108 princes who have feasted on his lifeblood. Antinous raises a golden goblet, his throat exposed and unsuspecting. The air is thick with the scent of roasted meat. Odysseus draws the notch to his ear. Will the king's ancient oath restore his throne? For 2 decades, the name of Odysseus was a ghost whispered in the salt spray. While he drifted through the wine-dark sea, Ithaca fell into a slow, rotting decay. The suitors moved into his palace like scavengers upon a fallen stag, demanding the hand of Queen Penelope and consuming the herds as if the master would never return. They turned his home into a den of vice, shaming his ancestors. The Great Hall, once a place of council, became a theater of gluttony. This was no longer a hero's house, it was a cage of wolves. Odysseus had returned not as a conqueror, but as a shadow. He walked his own halls as a broken old man, enduring kicks to map the terrain of his house. He saw who remained loyal and who had sold their souls. He observed the height of the windows, the weight of the doors, and the way the shadows pooled at dusk. He was no longer just a king, he was a predator, surveying a trap. He understood his greatest weapon was invisibility. To the suitors, he was a nuisance. To himself, he was the storm, gathering its lightning. The strategy was born of cold necessity. He commanded Telemachus, his son, to move with the silence of a ghost and strip the hall of its teeth. Under the cover of night, every bronze shield, iron spear, and razor-edged sword was carried out and locked away. The walls that once gleamed with war gear were left naked. Odysseus wanted no fair fight. He wanted a forensic execution. He would bottle them in, turning the site of their revelry into a tomb. He had to change the terms, transforming the banquet into a masterfully prepared kill zone. The preparation reached its peak in the ritual of the bow. While the suitors fumbled with the ancient wood, unable to even bend the limb, Odysseus felt the grain like the hand of an old friend. He rubbed the horn with tallow, checking for cracks from years of neglect. Beside him stood the few who held the line, the loyal swineherd and the cowherd, men who understood the weight of an oath. Telemachus stood at his shoulder, a young hawk finding his wings. The cowherd locked the outer gates, the bolt sounding like a death knell. Odysseus whispered a command to bar the doors of the women's quarters. He looked at the great bow and murmured that this day, the string would sing a different song. A sharp crack of thunder rolled over the palace, a sign from Zeus that the time for patience had ended. The beggar king stood at the threshold, the line between a broken life and a king's vengeance. As Antinous tilted his head back to swallow wine, the first arrow left the string. It did not merely hit, it transfixed. The bronze head tore through the suitor's throat. The golden cup clattered to the floor, splashing wine, muddied by a jet of arterial red. The suitors leaped from their couches, reaching instinctively for weapons on the walls, only to find the stone bare. Their fingers grasped at shadows. Odysseus stood silhouetted against the light, his voice a low rumble, filling the cavernous room. He told them they were dogs who thought he would never return. And now, the end was upon them. The transition from feast to slaughter was instantaneous. The silver-tongued Eurymachus tried to bargain, offering gold to settle the debt. Odysseus did not want gold. He wanted the balance of the scales. Eurymachus drew a hidden blade and charged, a desperate animal lunging at the hunter. Odysseus did not flinch. A second arrow caught the suitor in the chest, sinking deep into his liver. The man spun and collapsed across a table, his life spilling over the bread he had stolen. The hall descended into a frantic, claustrophobic chaos. Arrows flew through the haze of fires, finding marks with precision. The suitors realized there was no escape. The doors were barred. The tomb was sealed. The struggle became a rhythmic, terrifying display of tactical dominance. Action. An arrow finds a heart. Consequence. A body hits the floor. Action. Telemachus drives a spear through an attacker's back. Odysseus moved with mechanical efficiency, honed by a decade of war and wandering. He used the bottleneck of the doorway to ensure only a few could rush him at once. The suitors were many, but they were a mob, not a phalanx. They threw footstools and trenchers, but these were toys against the man who had faced the Cyclops and the Sirens. The air became a fog of sweat, iron, and the copper tang of blood. Odysseus was a whirlwind of bronze, the personification of a house reclaiming itself. He struck with a rage tempered by discipline, his feet sliding on the gore-slicked floor but never losing purchase. He saw the faces of men he knew as boys, now reduced to meat by their own greed. They scrambled over furniture, slipping in wine and blood, their cries for mercy swallowed by the roar of the fire. The forensic kill zone was absolute, and the slaughter was total. In the heart of the carnage, Odysseus realized he was not just killing men, he was excising a rot that had settled into the stones of Ithaca. The revelation hit him with the weight of a mountain. His kingdom was never lost to the sea. It was nearly lost to the silence of his own absence. The struggle was not for the throne, but for the soul of his home. As Athena's shadow fell over the hall, her aegis shield flickering like a storm cloud, the remaining suitors lost all hope. The gods had finally made their choice. The aftermath was a heavy, suffocating silence. The only sound was the dripping of blood from carved tables and the ragged breathing of the four men who stood amidst the mountain of the dead. The Great Hall was no longer a place of light. It was a charnel house. Smoke curled around the rafters, obscuring the faces of the fallen. Odysseus stood in the center, spattered in the dark ichor of his enemies. He looked like a lion that had gorged on a kill. Yet there was no triumph in his eyes, only the grim satisfaction of duty. The cost of restoration was visible in every corner. Odysseus was exhausted, his muscles trembling. He looked at the bodies of young men, the flower of Ithaca's nobility, now a pile of discarded limbs. He had saved his kingdom, but he had killed its future to do it. The physical wounds were minor compared to the weight of the crown he had just picked up from the dirt. He knew the families would seek blood. The peace he won was bought at the price of a generation. Every drop of blood was a word in a darker chapter. The lesson was not found in the strength of his arm, but in the patience of his heart. He won because he was willing to be a beggar before he was a king. Justice is a cold business requiring timing and the loyalty of the humble. It was the herdsman who held the doors. It was the son who held the shield. His restraint allowed him to build a trap from which no greed could escape. Odysseus restored the order, but the world he returns to is not the one he left. The sea still calls. History remembers Odysseus for his cunning and the wooden horse of Troy. But in the trial of the Great Hall, he learned that a kingdom is not held by a gold crown, but by the cold, uncompromising edge of a righteous blade. The final test is not against a monster, but against the families he was born to rule. Walk with us through the old stories. Subscribe to Saga Weaver, where ancient warriors face impossible choices.